Good morning, fifth grade. So we're going to start today with looking at Chapter 1, Lesson 2, How Did the People of the Desert Southwest Meet Their Needs? So I'm going to go ahead and start by reading off this page to you. How did the people of the Desert Southwest meet their needs? Lesson outcomes. What am I learning? So in this lesson, you are going to use your investigative skills to learn about the cultures of the Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache peoples. Why am I learning it? Reading and talking about how people live in a harsh desert conditions will help you understand how people adapt to their environments. And then how will I know that I learned it? You'll be able to compare and contrast different groups of Southwest Native Americans and explain how they lived in the desert. So we're going to look at the Navajo, the Apache, and the Pueblo people, and we're going to compare and contrast. So see things that they have similar and see things that they're different that they did to help them survive. So once you look at this picture over here, it says look at the details. Look closely at the picture. What meaning or purpose do you think these markings have? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show a quick video about how the Native Americans of the Southwest lived. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you now.
Imagine living in the Southwest region. The days are very hot and the nights are cold. There is very little rainfall here and the land is dry. This is the desert. Native American tribes such as the Pueblo and Navajo lived here. Like all other Native American tribes, the Pueblo adapted to where they lived. They hunted small desert animals such as rabbits and snakes and ate desert plants such as prickly pears and berries. They also built tiny dams and canals to direct water to their crops. This method was called dry farming. The word Pueblo originates from the Spanish language. It was used to describe both the people and their homes. Pueblos were made with clay and straw bricks called adobe. Each Pueblo had many levels, almost like an apartment building, where extended families and other large groups of tribal members lived close together. The Pueblo tribe believed in spirits they called cachinas. According to Pueblo beliefs, cachinas bring rain and help crops grow. The Pueblo held cachina ceremonies to gain favor with the spirits. Cachina dances are an important part of these ceremonies. People train for years to be cachina dancers. Each dancer wears traditional clothing and dances to music played on flutes, rattles, and whistles. Dancers sometimes give out colorful dolls that are used to teach children about the different cachinas. Many Pueblo beliefs and traditions still continue today.
All right, so after watching that video, kind of gives us a little bit of background knowledge into some of these desert Southwest peoples. So let's go ahead and continue with reading Chapter 1, Lesson 2. Let me go ahead and make this a little bigger for you so you can read it along with me. All right, so how did the people of the desert Southwest meet their needs? The Pueblo people. The Pueblo peoples of the American Southwest have inhabited the area for more than 1,000 years. They mostly farmed crops such as corn and beans, and they built permanent homes out of stone and adobe clay. The Spanish word for these homes is pueblo, and that is how these people got their name. Pueblo homes were modeled after the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Pueblo. They are cube-like rooms stacked on top of each other. The largest rooms are at the bottom, while the smaller rooms are near the top. There are also fewer rooms near the top. So the entire house does not look like a big square or rectangle, but more like a small stepped pyramid. Wooden ladders outside the rooms were usually used to get from one floor to another. Sometimes the bottom floor would have no doors or windows, and a person could get in only by climbing a ladder. This made the structure easy to defend because the ladder could be pulled up. Pueblo buildings were usually home to several families and had connecting shared rooms. They also contained kivas, special below-ground rooms used for rituals and ceremonies. So looking at the picture here, you can kind of see kind of an example of what one of these pueblos would look like. There would be no way to enter in here. These are just cutouts to kind of show you inside of them. And then you can kind of look at this timeline up here as well for kind of what was going on during this time period. So there are many groups that make up the Pueblo people. Two of these are the Zuni and the Hopi. The Zuni occupy their ancestral land in the Zuni River Valley, though their territory is not as large as it was in the past. Attacks by Spanish treasure hunters and later settlers from the United States caused the Zuni to abandon some of their villages. They gathered into a single village to better protect themselves. This village was called Halona and is now called Zuni. Another Pueblo group is the Hopi. The Hopi people are believed to be one of the oldest desert peoples. Their village of Orabi is believed to be nearly 900 years old. They use dams and irrigation to grow crops such as corn, cotton, beans, and squash. They also took advantage of the sand dunes that formed against the sides of mesas. These dunes would help trap moisture, and so the Hopi would plant crops in them. Hopi men and women had different jobs. The men farmed and hunted. They also wove cloth from cotton. The women gathered food like nuts and berries. They also made baskets and pottery to store their food. The Hopi were among the first people to fire or strengthen by heating their pottery using coal. So I'm not sure if you guys have done that yet in art, but if you make stuff with clay, you can actually fire it in a kiln and like really high heat, and it makes that clay hard. And so we talked a little bit, we heard in the video about Kachina dolls. And so this is an example here, these pictures of Kachina dolls. Important parts of Hopi culture include Kachinas. According to Hopi beliefs, Kachinas are spirits who live in sacred places for half of the year. During the other half, they live near the Hopi villages and bring with them rain and the growing season. The Kachinas are represented by masked dancers who perform in the villages when the Kachinas visit. There are hundreds of Kachinas, so the dancers often give small carved Kachina dolls to children to help them learn about the spirits. You can take a look at the map here. It says the Native Americans of the Southwest 1500s. So you can see where the Pueblo lands are, which are these kind of darker orange areas, and then the non-Pueblo lands, that's all desert area, and then around that. And you can see that where the Apache and the Navajo are at, and we will read more about them here in just a minute. So on to the Navajo. The Navajo were neighbors to the Pueblo and borrowed some of their ideas. They used irrigation to grow crops, made clothes with cotton, and were skilled in making jewelry and pottery. So these are the similarities. Remember, we talked about we were going to compare and contrast. So these are some similarities between the Navajo and the Pueblos. Despite these similarities, the Navajo were not related to the Pueblo. The Navajo were related to the Athabascans of Alaska and Canada. Scholars think the Navajo migrated from the northern tundra to the southwestern deserts in the late 1200s. And so you can kind of see where they believe that original group, the Athabascans, came from here, and then that the Navajo descended from them and descended down here to now where we know of the Navajo settling now. The Navajo were originally hunter-gatherers, but quickly adopted new techniques for surviving in the desert. In addition to learning farming from the Pueblo, the Navajo also learned from Spanish settlers when they arrived in the 1500s. They were interested in the animals the Spanish brought with them. The Navajo soon became skilled at herding sheep and cattle, as well as riding horses. The relationship with the Spanish was otherwise hostile. The Spanish clashed with several of the Native American groups. The Navajo became close allies with the Pueblo, the Apache, in fighting the Spanish. The Navajo lived in hogans, large dome-shaped buildings. Hogans were made of logs or stone and covered in mud and dirt. They had one entrance, usually facing the east and covered with a blanket. Hogans had no windows, only a hole in the roof so the smoke from the fire could escape. And so here's an example, kind of what a hogan would look like. Traditionally, the Navajo believe in hosho, or walking in beauty. This means maintaining balance with the earth. They believe that being out of harmony with the earth is the cause of illness and suffering. In order to restore harmony, they still take part in long ceremonies involving singing and dancing. Many of these ceremonies are still practiced today. All right, and lastly, we make our way to the Apache. The Apache language, like Navajo, is in the Athabascan family. Therefore, many historians believe that the Apache also migrated from Canada. Apache's oral history, on the other hand, claims it was the opposite. According to the oral history, the Athabascans to the north are descendants of the Apache in the south. Whatever the origins, the Apache are quite different from the Navajo and the Pueblo peoples. The Apache were not farmers, but hunter-gatherers. They hunted buffalo, deer, cougar, and other animals. The Apache were very skilled hunters and had tricks such as rubbing themselves with the animal fat to hide their scent. They also gathered agave, cactus, nuts, and berries. Sometimes they would get food and supplies by trading with their Pueblo neighbors. Other times they would conduct raids against Pueblo villages, earning them a reputation for being fierce and warlike. The name Apache, in fact, comes from the Zuni word for enemy. All right, so we're going to find out on the next page that the Apache lived in what was called a wickiup. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through kind of how those were built. So step 1, the Apache made poles from green and flexible tree branches. Step 2, holes were dug in a circle for the poles. Step 3, the poles were bent and tied with the strips of animal skin to create a dome. Step 4, smaller willow poles were tied around the sides and the top. Step 5, animal skins or reed mats were used to cover the dome. And then step 6, they finished the wickiup with a fire pit and smoke hole for a chimney. So that's kind of how they built their homes. All right, so continuing on with the reading. Although fearsome to enemies, the Apache were gentle and affectionate to their children and relatives. Like many Native American groups, the Apache traced their ancestors through their mothers rather than their fathers. They traditionally live in relatively small groups made up of their extended family. These groups were independent, and it was not until recent times that the Apache unified under a single government. The Apache lived in wickiups. These houses were dome-shaped like Navajo hogans, but did not use earth or clay as building materials. Instead, they were covered in skins, reed mats, brush, or grass. Although the wickiups were not as strong as the Pueblos or hogans, they could be easily taken apart and moved. And this was helpful for the Apache, who moved from place to place. So remember, we said they were hunter-gatherers, and so when you have hunter-gatherers, they're usually nomads. That's nomads, nomads, which means that they move from place to place. They don't stay in one specific area. So these houses specifically were helpful to the Apache because they were nomadic, and they were able to take these houses down and move them and put them back up in a different spot. Okay, so that is the end of lesson 2, and we'll stop there for today. So hopefully you've gotten all the questions answered on this Edpuzzle, and we'll start on lesson 3 tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.